Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ellie.
What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel and welcome back to another true crime Sunday. I don't know if this is gonna go up on a Sunday, but this has been my first true crime case that I have done in months now, because I have been in my last year of my undergraduate degree, so this has been hectic. I'm on like a week-long break right now before I go on to my next semester. Today we actually have a sponsor for this video, and today's sponsor actually requested that I do another true crime video. So before we get into the case, I would like to introduce today's sponsor as Bava Beauty Co. Now, Bava Beauty Co do a range of different beauty products, but the product that I personally tried is the brow lamination kit, and I actually have a video of me doing a brow lamination on myself. This is more of a subtle brow lamination look. It's not one of those looks where you see the girls who have the eyebrows all the way up to here. Like, this is a very natural looking brow lamination effect. They're an Australian company and they specialize in not just brow lamination kits but also lash lifting kits. I do have a discount code which I will link in the description box below, and you'll see it on screen right here. Don't judge my broken nail, I literally only just broke that. So for all of you true crime lovers out there who have been missing a video while I've been at uni, you can thank Bava Beauty Co for sponsoring this video and requesting a true crime case, because they could have sponsored any other type of video. It could have been beauty, but they like true crime. We all like true crime, so thanks guys. So today's case is actually one that I have been asked about a lot since the documentary came out, and I'm sure you can see by the title. We are going to be covering the Don Lewis case, who is Carole Baskin's ex-husband who disappeared. And I've actually been asked a lot about this case, and I never really, you know, like, I watched Tiger King and I was like, okay, Carole Baskin killed her husband, pretty obvious, whatever. For some reason, Tiger King was stuck in my head, and I decided to just have a look-see and what people thought on Reddit on what happened to Don Lewis. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people on Reddit are straight up saying Carole Baskin, she killed him, but that's not actually what I believe. So let me show you all of the things that I was able to dig up on this case. Before we get started, let's talk about who Don Lewis was, or is. Don Lewis is a man of mystery, to say the least. Don Lewis was known as Don Lewis. He was also known as Jack Donald Lewis, but he also has a whole bunch of secret identities, different identities. We'll get more into that later on. But Don Lewis was born on April 30th, 1938. He was declared legally deceased in 2002, but so far there is no evidence that he's actually deceased. Don left behind $5 million worth of assets and was said to have been worth around $7 million that we know of legally. He was born in Florida and he made a name for himself, specifically in real estate and in selling used cars. Tiger King will have you think that he was just this really successful real estate guy, except his business dealings in particular with real estate were quite dodgy. Some have described him as being kind of like a loan shark, but technically the definition of being a loan shark is quite different, but they're morally on the same kinds of description. In the Tampa Bay Times, which is a newspaper, this article was from 1997. The article said that Don was involved in a practice where he would seek out financially strained people and basically buy out their mortgages and then charge them a rate of 18% payback to him. If they were able to pay him back on time for the first 6 months, he would usually let them keep their house. But if they couldn't, I mean, bear in mind that these are financially strained people in the first place, if they couldn't pay him back the 18% interest, then he would kick them out and then sell their home. And that's where he made most of the profit. Now, he was said to have done this over 350 times in 5 different counties in Florida. A lot of people speculate that Don didn't just do this in Florida, but that he was also doing it in Costa Rica as well. Gladys says that she was head over heels for Don, and that in 1981 he found himself a new beau and he divorced her. Another thing that isn't mentioned in Tiger King is that Don was sued by his now ex-wife Gladys because she found out that he had multiple identities and that he was hoarding his wealth under a whole bunch of different names so that she couldn't get any money in the divorce. Don had previously fathered 3 daughters and an adopted son with Gladys, and he cut all of them out of the will. I'm gonna tell you about how Don and Carol Baskin actually met, but I do want to talk about the will and the children and this ex-wife of his, and especially how he treated his children and how he treated that past marriage, because it really wasn't touched on in Tiger King. When Don tried to cut Gladys and his children out of the will, Carol decided to keep them in there. She decided to give them the bare minimum of 10%. Carol also decided to give Gladys everything, like all of the properties, everything that Don and Gladys had accumulated in that marriage. It's been noted that the reason that Carol did this is because when you immediately cut someone out of a will, a court might see that as being spitefully motivated, and then when the person dies, the people who've been cut out can say that, you know, they want to contest the will, and then sometimes the courts will say, yes, you can contest the will, and then they end up getting way more than what you had wanted them to get in your will. And so some people are saying that Carol gave Gladys the bare minimum of 10% so that it would be less likely she would contest the will, or it would be less likely that the courts would say that it was spitefully motivated, because she's still in there. She's just getting a lot less than what she would have gotten. And in regard to the children being taken out of the will, Don was pushing for the children to be completely taken off the will, getting 0%. And this is because his children had testified in the court case where Gladys had sued him for using multiple identities and hoarding his wealth under those different aliases. And because of that lawsuit, Gladys actually got $150,000 awarded to her. So she won. So let's talk about how Don and Carol Baskin actually met, because this is another thing that Tiger King doesn't put in there. I mean, they do, but they don't give it any context. And so I've gotten context from people who live in that area. Don met Carol on a night out in Tampa, and it was actually when Carol was fleeing from her domestically violent partner. We don't really go too much into Carol Baskin's childhood, but you know, she did have a very, very rough childhood. And I think that if we did actually look at how she grew up, we would see a pretty consistent narrative that Carol Baskin is a very resilient young lady who had a very traumatic childhood. Like, I implore you guys to go have a look at that. I don't know if I can say a lot of the stuff that happened to her without this video getting completely demonetized, but she had it rough. So anyways, on the night that she met Don, she was walking down a particular street, which is known for, it's a place where you go pick up some fun, if you know what I'm saying. It rhymes with prostitutes. Then suddenly a man in a car pulls up beside her, like you do on streets like that. And he asks her to get in, and she says no. And so he's like, listen, all I want from you is just to talk, because I've just had a fight with my wife and I just want someone to talk to. And then apparently Carol is like, no sir, not me. And he's probably very confused at this point in time because of what that street is known for. Like, you pull up, you ask, and they usually get in. Carol says no, supposedly. And then supposedly Don drives away and then comes back with a revolver. And he says, listen, you can have this revolver, you can point it at me, I'm not gonna do anything that you don't want me to do. And this is apparently when Carol says yes. And so she jumps in and they decide to go to a hotel. And listen, not that it matters at all that maybe Carol was doing a little something something, like it was no coincidence that she was on that street. But I do think that it's important to keep this in context, what that street was, what they were doing there, because it really does speak to their character. He is a rowdy boy. It also speaks to possibly what Carol was doing to try and actually flee her domestically violent partner. And there's no shame in that. It's just important to keep things in context and actually tell you what was actually going down. Don didn't actually tell Carol his real name. In the same way that he had kept different aliases and different identities with his last wife, he did this with Carol Baskin as well. And also bear in mind that Don and Carol didn't leave their respective partners straight away either. They were having an affair, and Don actually was having an affair with multiple other women at the same time as he was with his wife and as he was with Carol. So Carol wasn't the only one, and this is another reason why he kept his name different to all these other women, because it was easier for him to have an affair, and you know, it was this whole ruse. And on top of that, Don Lewis was known to be this rich and wealthy guy, which is also another reason as to why he didn't tell Carol his real name in the first place. So at this time, Don was engaging in extramarital affairs with more women than just Carol. However, Carol soon became his favorite. She was helping him grow his wealth tenfold. He was a man that could not read, apparently, and she was just, you know, she was substantially growing and multiplying his wealth, all while not knowing his real name. This is when Don's secretary comes into play. Now, it's really important to remember that Don's secretary she's in on most of his scams. And the first scam that we're going to talk about with the secretary and Don and Carol is that the secretary knew that Don had given these women different names to call him by. And so whenever Carol would call him, she'd be like, hey, I'm looking for so-and-so. I don't actually know what name he gave her, but I just know that it wasn't Don. So she would say the fake name, and the secretary would know that she meant Don, and she'd pass the call on. But one day, the secretary wasn't in, and a different secretary was there. So Carol calls up and she's like, hey, I'm looking for so-and-so, and the secretary is like, I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no one here by that name. This is when Don has to come clean, tell Carol that he's got several identities and that she's known him this whole time under a fake name. A decade after they met, they decided to leave their respective partners and get married. And then a year after they got married, they decided to make their first big purchase together. They decided to co-purchase a place called Wildlife on Easy Street, which all of us know as Big Cat Rescue. So at the beginning of this business, at the beginning of Big Cat Rescue, they were using this to breed and sell big cats, and it was bringing them a lot of money. Now, the reason that this soon changed is because Carol and Don went to an auction where she just fell in love with this bobcat, and apparently there was a man there who was like outbidding them, and he was like trying to get this bobcat. So Carol goes over to this man and she says, listen, bobcats are going to be extremely aggressive when they grow older, and they could rip your face off. They could maul your face off. And this man turns to Carol and says, listen,
honey,
I'm not even gonna know what this cat is gonna look like when it's older. I'm a taxidermist. I'm just buying it so that I can kill it. It's just gonna be dead anyway. This made Carol incredibly upset, and she made Don buy the cat to stop it from getting taxidermied by this man at the auction. They continued to breed and sell big cats until Carol went to another auction and she saw that one of the cats that she had bred and sold ended up back at the auction. And this is kind of when it all went full circle for Carol. She was like, that is one of the cats that I have personally bred and sold, and it could literally end up being purchased by a man who's just going to kill it and use it for taxidermy. And she just did not want that to happen, and this is when big problems started to emerge in the marriage. Breeding and selling big cats is something that was bringing Don an insane fortune. But this was a huge moral predicament for Carol, and so here we have Don getting all of this money and his wife, who is adamant that she doesn't want to do this anymore. She wants this to be a charity, whereas he wants it to be a business where you breed and sell cats. According to Carol, Don was frequently cheating on her and flying once a month to Costa Rica, and she said that it only got worse when she began to menstruate. The Costa Rica narrative was something that was consistently held up by his friends and family. They all said that he had planned to move there at some point, but Carol did not want to move at all. She did not want to leave Big Cat Rescue. But little did she know, every time that Don went to Costa Rica, he would be funneling money into a safety box. So while Don was on his trips to Costa Rica, Carol would be trying to clear the land of junk. Don did not like this at all. He became enraged, he called the police, And then when the police got there, they were like, okay, this is a domestic dispute. And the police told Don that there's literally nothing that they can do. That's his wife. The only thing that would ever make that illegal is if he had a restraining order out against her. And so guess what Don did? Don filed a restraining order against her, but he never served her with it. And he continued to live with her while it was going to court and thereafter. The restraining order actually got rejected because the judge didn't think that he was filing the restraining order for the right purposes. Don continued to live with Carol even after the restraining order was rejected, but they were still butting heads a lot about business, about everything. They would fight consistently, and Don would continuously tell Carol, hey, I'm gonna divorce you. But Carol always said, nah, he was never serious about it. We were just fighting, blah, blah, blah. He's still preparing to go to Costa Rica. Don was actively transferring his properties over to a company in Costa Rica. The last time that anyone ever saw Don was when he was preparing a truck for a trip to Miami, and he had already purchased his ticket to go to Costa Rica. Don's white van was found about 65 k's away from Big Cat Rescue in Spring Hill, Florida at an airport, and his keys were found like literally on the floorboard of his van. The van had been there for a few days and there really wasn't any evidence that they could get from it. Now, at the time of Don's disappearance, Carol claimed that he had been developing symptoms for Alzheimer's, that he was going through dumpsters, that he completely lost his short-term memory, and that he was just mentally deteriorating, and that he had gone to doctors about it. And I'd be really interested to see if there's any records of him being booked in to see a doctor for like dementia or Alzheimer's, because thus far I haven't seen any documentation on that. The fact that Don might have been developing Alzheimer's is something that's heavily disputed by his personal attorney. Now, his personal attorney is going to come into it a lot later, and I think that his personal attorney knows a lot more about what happened to Don. But just know that his personal attorney vehemently denies that Don was losing his mind. Where was Carol when he went missing? This is where a lot of people think that she did it, because the just her alibi is just strange. Carol claims that she was at a Walmart buying milk and meat for her animals at 3 in the morning. She says that she ran out of gas and she called her brother, who happens to be a policeman, to come and pick her up and take her home. This is where a lot of people on the internet are like, ooh, so her brother's a police officer. That means that he helped her cover it up. Not so quick. That's not exactly what happened, because he didn't actually come and pick her up. Carol's brother, while yes, he was a police officer, was also on duty that night. He'd arrested someone, so he had a perp in his car at the time that she called. So he had organized for a different police officer to come and pick her up and take her home. His timeline is accounted for. He actually did take the suspect to booking, got him all booked, and the timeline is accounted for. He's not the one who escorted Carol home. The investigation into Don's whereabouts, specifically on the Costa Rican property, lasted 5 days and was completely fruitless. And here's another thing that makes it a little bit weird, and it might just be because people's memories are bad, or maybe he saw people or different guards at different times, but the thing that's a little bit weird here is his Costa Rican guards all have different accounts of when they last saw him. You've got some of them that are saying, I saw Mr. Lewis 3 months ago. You've got other guards saying, I saw Mr. Lewis 3 weeks ago. You've got other guards saying, I saw Mr. Lewis last week. But what was evident from the Costa Rican investigation is that Don Lewis had actually had girlfriends in Costa Rica, and he was also engaging in some illegitimate business practices, if you will, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Don was involved in illegal activities, you know what I'm saying? Not only that, but 2 of Don's ocelots had also been shipped to an unknown location, and he had left behind his $5 million of assets in Florida. Here's the thing. Don was said to have been worth $5 to $7 million legally, and the police have made a distinction between what they mean on what he definitely had, which was up to 7 million, but they said that he was likely worth tenfold that. This is because not only did he bury a lot of money, not only did he funnel a lot of money, not only did he buy gold bars and hide them. When you're into the stuff that he's into, those aren't legal practices. Hence why you would be worth many more million than what you tell the bank that you have, than what you tell the government that you have. Like, this man was involved for a very long time in stuff, you know what I'm saying? But in terms of what he did leave behind, $5 million compared to what he actually has is not a lot of money. It's a lot of money to someone like Carol, it's a lot of money to someone like Gladys, and it is a lot of money to his children. So what happened when Don is gone with many more millions than just $5 million? Well, people like Gladys and people like Carol begin to fight over his $5 million in assets. Most of Don's real estate was left to Carol, but as I said earlier, Carol did make sure that in the will that Gladys and the children would get the minimum of 10% as well as everything that was accumulated before the divorce. Now, the detective on Don Lewis's case says that the documentary Tiger King definitely spun the story for entertainment and that there is no evidence that Don is actually deceased. If Carol was actually to have fed her tigers a human body, it would have been incredibly messy and the scent would have been picked up straight away. And when you consider that the workers on the rescue were there every single day, knowing that their boss had disappeared under shady circumstances, they would have noticed if something was off. Hence, if they saw, you know, human remains or whatever on the property. And again, as I said before, there would have been a scent. Tigers are messy. And they're also not gonna eat the bone. And you also have to keep in mind that these tigers are on a routine schedule of butchered meat. Now, Don Lewis's children to Gladys are adamant that the police did a really bad job for not testing DNA on the meat grinder that was on the property. However, the meat grinder that was on the property was actually removed weeks before Don even went missing. So that's not a possibility, but they continued to spin that story. Joe Exotic decided to go with an alternative theory that Don was buried in the septic tank, but the septic tank was only installed years after Don disappeared. And the fact that Don's van was found at an airport where none of his airplanes were taken, it really does look staged to make it seem like he left. And this is where we need to take into account the plane situation. So first of all, Don got his pilot's license and then it was taken away shortly after he got it. Because of this, he was known to not document flights. He was known to fly under the radar, which means that you're flying at a low altitude so that you don't get picked up on a radar. Another thing to remember is that Don had planned to go to Costa Rica. He had purchased the ticket and he wasn't planning on flying himself. He was planning on moving to Costa Rica and he had already purchased his own ticket. We're gonna come back to the topic of planes in a second, but I do just want to talk about the will before we do. A lot of people are saying that Carol was responsible for whacking her husband because the will was written up in the case of disappearance. If you are someone writing up a will, usually you're going to write it up for the circumstance of being deceased. But the will was written up for the circumstance of disappearance as well. To a lot of people who don't know the background of Don Lewis, this piece of information makes them think, well, who's gonna plan on disappearing? It must have been Carol. She's probably put this in here so that she can get his money. And yes, it is very strange for the average person to put the circumstance of disappearance in their will. If you're aware that your husband or you yourself are in the mafia or in some kind of mob or in some kind of circumstance where it is easy for someone like you to go missing, putting disappearance as a circumstance to your will is something that is smart and not out of the usual at all. Another thing is that when Don Lewis went missing, Carol didn't just leave it up to the police to do their investigation. She also hired her own private investigator to see what happened to Don. Both the police and her private investigator came up with nothing. Another thing that makes people think that Carol is responsible is because when she was asked to do a polygraph test, she said, "I'd love to, but my lawyers said that I shouldn't, and so I'm not going to." Now, if you are someone who is a true crime buff, someone who is obsessed with true crime, you know for a fact that taking a polygraph test is there's literally nothing beneficial even if you are innocent. A polygraph test does not prove that you are not lying, and it's in some cases it can make you seem like you're lying when you're not. So lie detector tests, if you are ever asked to take one, just say no. This is when I want to come back to Don's wealth and Don's work as a dodgy person. Don was actually loaning money to the Helicopter brothers and was involved with the, I guess, Costa Rican version of the mafia. So again, while he's doing all of this stuff for the Helicopter brothers, it makes perfect sense as to why he has made circumstance of disappearance a part of his will and power of attorney. But here's the thing with the will. It is dodgy. It looks like whoever signed Don's signature, it definitely was not Don. In fact, it looked like it was traced directly from Don's marriage certificate. But it wasn't just Don's signature that looked like it had been forged. It was also the notary's signature and the witness's signature that looked like they had also been forged by the same person that forged the signature for Don. A couple of handwriting experts have looked at this and said that all of the signatures look eerily similar, like they were written by the same person. And when all of this came to light, the person who signed as a witness, whose name is Susan, came out and said, "Yes, I signed it, that was me," but then later on would be caught out in that lie when she was sending an email to an unknown person about the incident. She said to the unknown person in her email that she does not remember signing any will and that Carol had her backed into a corner, and that's why she said that she signed it. She also said that when she was given her certificate, and it was something to do with certification to work with big cats, it had Don's signature on it, but Don had actually said to Susan, "Oh, that's not my signature. That's what my signature looks like when Carol tries to forge it." Susan said that she was scared of Carol and that most people that come into contact with her are also just as scared. But what about the notary of the will? Well, apparently that was a woman named Sandra who has no recollection of notarizing the will, but was also their housekeeper. The statute of limitations for forged wills or forged signatures or whatever it is that it is, the statute of limitations for that has apparently passed. Personally, I've seen both of the signatures and it just, I mean, I'm not an expert, but even I can tell that the one on the will looks like it's literally been traced by someone trying to copy the one on the marriage certificate. I don't think it takes an expert to see that it is not Don's signature. 5 years after Don went missing, Carol started dating a man called Jay Backles. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I'm really sorry, but I don't think it really matters. Anyways, she started dating a man named Jay. This is another thing that doesn't look good for Carol, but I can actually see where this came about. So Jay filed a restraining order against Carol, saying that he was scared for his life. A lot of people use this and say that, ooh, this is two men that have filed restraining orders against Carol. However, when you look at the application for a restraining order by this Jay person, who, by the way, it was denied, when you look at the reasoning that he put down, it's pretty obvious that he's kind of just feeding into the rumors that are going around because it's beneficial to him. Why did he file this restraining order? Well, on the restraining order application, it says, "Are you and the other party involved in any other court dealings?" And he ticked yes. And he said in the notes of that they were in the process of an eviction proceeding. Additionally, the reasoning that he gave for applying for the restraining order is that he had heard from other people that Carol was dangerous, that she got rid of her ex-husband. And he'd also noted that one time when he asked what happened to Don, she said that dead people can't talk. He also claims that she said when human remains were found locally, not on her property, but locally, that if it was on her property, she'd be in a lot of trouble. Now, who knows? Who knows if she actually did say those things? I don't think that Carol, you know, if she is this mastermind that got rid of Don for all of this money, I don't think she'd be that stupid to tell a boyfriend all of this stuff. And when you take into consideration that this Jay person also included in his evidence that he was scared because of what he had heard about Carol, I think it's pretty obvious that he's trying to use this to bolster his eviction proceeding. And I don't think that it helps when he is using Don's children, who first of all don't seem to like Don and definitely don't like Carol. It doesn't help when you're using them as your witnesses. Like, it just seems very in the family, if you know what I'm saying. And in terms of this relationship, a lot of news media outlets and people on Reddit will say, oh, well, she just moved on way too quickly when she started seeing Jay. Or like, you know, her husband just went missing. How could she date someone like straight after? This was 5 years after Don went missing, and it wasn't some affair. It was a boyfriend. She had waited 5 years. That's not immediately getting into a relationship. That's 5 years later. Now, this next thing is pertaining to Don's secretary. Remember, the secretary that has been in on Don's scams before. So Don's personal assistant of 18 years. 18 years is a really dang long time, okay? She took out a life insurance policy on Don and also embezzled $600,000 from him, and he had her fired a couple of months before he went missing. If you are employed by someone for 18 years, especially someone who is apparently addicted to extramarital affairs, I really wonder if maybe his personal assistant felt like he had done her wrong, or maybe they had engaged in an extramarital affair and she just got over it and decided, you know what, I deserve $600K for everything that this man has put me through for the last 18 years of working with him. We don't know what happened there, but the fact that she embezzled such a large amount of money from this man that she had worked for 18 years, I just don't think you do that just because. I think you do that because something happened, something pisses you off, or you feel like you want to get back at them for something. And then don't forget, a life insurance policy on someone's life who isn't your significant other is just a very weird thing to do. Usually you only get life insurance policies for your children or your spouse. It's weird that she got a life insurance policy out on him. But nevertheless, she was fired a few months before he went missing. But also, that's pretty recent to when he went missing. So I wonder if that's maybe an avenue we want to go down. I don't think that it's any lie or any kind of secret that Don's daughters or Don's granddaughters really are not a fan of Carol Baskin. She obviously ripped up a marriage. You know, the circumstances behind it, she got all of the money. It's obvious that they're going to be pretty ruthless against her. In an interview, Carol Baskin, I need to stop saying it like that, but I don't know how to say her name without the accent. In an interview, Carol Baskin said that it would be really hard for a person to get rid of a body. You would need more people. Don's granddaughter made a TikTok and said, you must have killed him if you know that. And then all of the news media reported it like, ooh, Don Lewis's granddaughter exposes Carol Baskin. And it's like, guys, it is common knowledge that it would take more than one person to like kill a grown man. So I really don't think that the granddaughter snapping back with attitude is any sort of exposing of Carol Baskin. I think that's just her and her side of the family being caught up in anger and a feud. I'm really not getting the vibe that Don's daughters or Don's granddaughters or Don's ex-wife or anyone from that side of the family is doing all of this stuff and being so angry because they miss Don or they want to know what happened to Don. I think that they're just doing this because they hate Carol and they're angry at Don for being cut out of the will, and they want what's due. Like, their whole family got torn apart because he had an extramarital affair and then he left to be with her. So there's a couple of interesting theories and a couple more things that Tiger King didn't actually put in their documentary. Don was involved in trafficking and got into some trouble. And I believe this as well because Don's personal attorney, remember this same personal attorney who refuted Carol's claims that Don was getting Alzheimer's, his personal attorney has a very specific theory on what happened. Don's personal attorney says that he thinks that Don was strangled from the back seat of an airplane and thrown out at 50 feet above the Mexican Gulf. That is weirdly specific, but he refuses to name names and he refuses to say anything other than that. His personal attorney allegedly says that he was a very cheap man and his cheapness got him killed. He says that Don likely got lured up to the Pilot County estates to go and look at an airplane. He's very specific in saying that a good deal on an airplane would have been the only thing to have lured him up there. I think that this is really interesting to say when you consider that none of Don's known airplanes had been missing, yet he was parked at the airport. Could this allude to the idea that maybe Don took an airplane that he had recently purchased? Interesting to think about. Another thing that I want to talk about is this video on YouTube supposedly done by a body language expert. A lot of people think that this is a really credible video, a really credible expert, but I personally don't think that it is a very credible analysis, and here's why. The body language expert examines interviews with Carol Baskin, saying that she is acting in a way that is giving off a level of deception and very little emotion. In my psychology degree, we learned that things like lie detector tests and trying to see if someone's lying by their body language isn't actually very accurate at all. Last semester, we learned that studies have shown that looking to the left or, you know, breathing rapidly or tilting your head in a certain direction is not indicative of a lie. We also learned that these signs to show that someone is lying or being deceptive is usually used for entertainment and movie purposes. But in this YouTube video where this body language expert is saying, oh, look at Carol, she looks to the left and then she blinks fast and, you know, she moves her head in this direction, and look, she's got wrinkles up in her forehead, we call those stress lines, but in this one she doesn't have any wrinkles in her forehead. And first of all, Botox, okay? About 2 months ago I would have had wrinkles doing anything in my forehead. You could call those stress lines. Right now there's no wrinkles because I've had Botox. Likely Carol Baskin, after amassing $5 million of assets, probably got a little bit of Botox done. None of those things are indicative of a lie. I learned that in my degree. I think that this body language expert is a little bit bogus. But what I'm also gonna say is Carol Baskin is an eccentric, flamboyant weirdo. And I don't think it takes an expert to see that. Usually, maybe there might be a baseline to body language expert, whatever. Not that I believe that that is even a credible thing. But you cannot put Carol Baskin on this baseline because she is a weird person. She has weird mannerisms, even when she's not talking about the disappearance of her ex-husband. She is just a very weird person. She makes weird body movements, and you can, even her face is weird. Like this is just like how she is. Like, she's a weird person, you know what I'm saying? Another thing that they say is that Carol brings up the last time that she spoke to Don, and apparently Don had told her, get a truck ready early, because he was preparing to leave. Carol consistently throughout the years hasn't really changed her story on what has happened, and something that she will continuously say when people ask her to recall their last conversation is this early thing. Now, the body language expert in this video is like, why does she keep saying early, early, early? Is it because she wants you to focus in on this detail that has nothing to do with anything? And I'm like, what are you, stupid? Like, people do that because they're holding on to something that is anchored in their memory. They remember this specific detail about the conversation because it was different. If the last conversation that I had with someone before they went missing was that they said something a little bit weird, or that stood out in my mind, or that was even kind of rhythmic or whimsical or song-like, like early, 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 that'll be something that I will remember and think about all of the time. So the fact that this expert is saying, ooh, she keeps repeating the same phrase, that's a little bit dodgy. No, that's typical of remembering your last conversation with someone, especially when they say something like early, early, early. Another thing that makes me question the credibility of this body language expert person is that in the video, she is very, like, she does things in a very non-objective way. So she'll say things like, whatever helps Carole Baskin sleep at night. And then at the end of the video, she says something like, I personally, after doing this one reading of Carole Baskin, think that she murdered her husband. That's not very professional. For an expert to do one reading on someone and be like, whatever helps you sleep at night, you definitely killed your husband. Body language experts, I already take with a grain of salt. But this particular one that has been used by the media being like, oh, a body language expert analyzes Carole Baskin and says that she's guilty. Like, I'm sorry, but this is likely just... But there is something that this expert brings up that I think is kind of interesting, is that she's not really being very emotive. Carole doesn't seem to be crying or like showing physical tears. She doesn't really seem to be emotional, and I know that in a lot of these cases people act differently to different kinds of circumstances, but I do think that this is an interesting point. I don't think that it definitely points to the fact that she might have killed her husband, but I do think that it points to her knowing what has likely happened to her husband, and it might not be death. And I'm gonna point again to smuggling, because if you consider all of the monthly uncharted plane rides flying very low so that he wouldn't be on the radar, when you consider that he was already funneling money, when you consider that he had amassed a wealth way beyond the 7 million that the government assumes that he has, when you consider that he is burying hordes of money, buying gold bars, and the fact that he is able to have all of these assets by supposedly being in the real estate business, his connection to a Costa Rican mafia. I mean, Carole knew this, his personal attorney knew this, his personal assistant knew this. The fact that Don even included the circumstance of disappearance in his will. Is it possible that Carole knows what happened to her husband? 100%, I think yes. Do I think that it was murder? I'm not quite sure. I just don't think that it was her who murdered him. What I do think though is that Carole forged the signatures on the will, likely because she knew that her husband wasn't going to be coming back anytime soon to tie up loose ends. It seems indicative of a relationship where you know what's going to happen and you have planned for what you're going to do when that particular circumstance does happen, especially when you are married to someone who is big in the trafficking business. We already know that Don had funneled about $400,000 in a Costa Rican safety box. However, when you consider how often he was going to Costa Rica, it's likely that he funneled way more into different safety deposit boxes, especially considering that he was planning on moving there permanently. So when you consider that Don Lewis's wealth was way beyond $7 million, I think the $5 million of assets that he left behind was quite possibly a trade-off for leaving in peace. And when you consider that Don was sued by his ex-wife Gladys for hiding his wealth under a whole bunch of different aliases, different identities, I don't think it's very much of a stretch to think that Don might have learnt from this and decided that he is not about to do that a second time with Carole Baskin. And the fact that Carol cashed in Don's will the day after she was legally allowed to makes me think that maybe this was a planned disappearance. Tiger King definitely did paint Joe Exotic as this flamboyant, innocent guy, and definitely painted Carol Baskin as this psycho who is not innocent, but it also leaves out a lot of information on Don. There's no denying that Carol is a little bit weird. You would expect someone who endured that kind of childhood to be a lot weird, but I do just want to point out the fact that Carol Baskin, as weird and flamboyant as she is, has lived happily for 20 years with Mr. Baskin without suing anyone for slander, without doing any of these crazy things that all of the other characters in this story are doing. She seems to be living her life. I do think that Carol knows something. I don't think that she murdered her husband. I think that it's possible that Don, even through all of their fights, even through all of their disagreements on what should happen with Big Cat Rescue, I think that Don definitely gave Carol the life that he thought she deserved as a trade-off for her silence. There is a mystery here, but I don't think the mystery is Carol Baskin whacking Don Lewis. I don't think that the tigers are snacking, and I think the most reasonable explanation, the one that people closest to Don seem to be alluding to, is that trafficking is the reason that he is no longer here. Doesn't really mean that he's dead though. That just means that he is no longer called Don Lewis and he is no longer in Florida. This was a wild ride learning about who Don Lewis really is, and I really wonder what new name he's picked for himself. I'm just kidding. But no, it really was a wild ride. Like, it just makes me wonder what you can do and what you can get away with when you have that much wealth. That's another thing. Do you think that Jeffrey Epstein is actually dead? Because I don't. After seeing the pictures, I don't think that he's dead. All right, you guys, so that is the case of Don Lewis. If you like these videos, give it a thumbs up. It really does help. And if you like my vibe, click subscribe. I would love to have you on my team, part of my family. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.